until the Alpha King covered her with his crown veil. No one remembered her name, and most did not notice her at all. Orphaned as a child, clothed in tattered rags that smelled faintly of smoke and rain, she had learned the quiet art of survival. The people whispered that she had a strange connection to the old, forgotten magic of the forest, a gift, or perhaps a curse. She did not know which. Life among the outcasts was harsh. Each day she scavenged scraps of food, dodged the cruel words of the town's children, and hid from guards who sometimes wandered the alleys looking for mischief or troublemakers. Yet in all the hardships, Alara carried something no one could see, a quiet strength, a defiance born from years of surviving when others would have given up. News spread like wildfire one chilly morning. The Alpha King Kalen would host the mating ball. It was a ceremony older than the kingdom itself, where the Alpha King chose a mate to stand beside him, a union of blood, magic, and power. The nobles began to prepare immediately. Jewelers polished crowns, tailors sewed gowns that shimmered like water, and perfumers filled the air with the scents of roses and rare spices. The court was a world of perfection and beauty, far removed from Alara's alleys, far removed from rags and shadows. Yet Alara felt a strange pull in her chest the moment she heard the announcement. It was as if a voice only she could hear whispered her name, urging her to go. She shook her head. She had no right to enter a place of kings and queens. She was nothing but a ragged girl, forgotten by the world. Still, the voice did not fade. On the night of the ball, the city sparkled with lights. Lanterns hung from every street, reflecting in puddles of melted snow. Music floated through the air, carried on the cold wind, and laughter spilled from the palace windows. Alara tightened the worn cloak around her shoulders, brushing back her tangled hair. She had no gown, no jewels, no invitation, and yet she found herself moving toward the palace gates. Inside, the ballroom was a vision of splendor. Chandeliers made of crystal hung like frozen waterfalls, reflecting golden light across the marble floors. Nobles in gowns and cloaks of velvet and silk moved gracefully, their laughter and chatter a melody of wealth and pride. They had adorned themselves for the Alpha King, for the ceremony that would decide the fate of many lives. Alara stepped into the hall, and instantly all eyes fell on her. Whispers rippled through the crowd, growing louder like a rising tide. "Who is that?" one noblewoman hissed, adjusting her necklace as if to shield herself from some invisible threat. "Why is she here in rags?" a young lord sneered. The hall was alive with judgment. The contrast between Alara's worn garments and the glittering gowns around her was impossible to ignore. She tried to retreat, but the crowd closed in with sneers and pointing fingers. Her heart pounded. She felt as if the very walls of the palace were watching, judging. And yet, something strange happened. In the midst of the mockery and fear, she sensed a presence, a commanding force that silenced her panic for a moment. Kalen, the Alpha King, sat on his throne at the far end of the hall. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hair as black as midnight and eyes that seemed to pierce through the soul. The court spoke of him with reverence and fear. He was known as ruthless, a king who punished disobedience without hesitation. Yet now he did not look at the nobles or the glittering gowns. His gaze was fixed solely on her. Alara's breath caught. There was something in his eyes, something she could not name. A spark of recognition, perhaps, or a curiosity that unsettled her. For the first time in her life she felt seen, not as a beggar or an outcast, but as someone who mattered. The nobles, oblivious to the silent exchange, continued their mocking. "She doesn't belong here," one whispered. "Is this some joke?" another asked, his laughter cruel and sharp. Alara felt a wave of panic, her instincts screaming to flee. But before she could move, the music stopped. Every eye turned to the throne. The room fell into an almost unnatural silence. Kalen rose slowly, the weight of his presence pressing down on the hall. Each step echoed like thunder. His gaze never left Alara, and even the nobles felt the chill of his scrutiny. They had known fear before, but this was different. This was power incarnate, deliberate, and undeniable. He stopped in front of her. The crowd held its breath. Kalen reached for the crown on his head. Gasps filled the room as he lifted it, his fingers brushing the jeweled veil that hung like a delicate waterfall of silver threads. Slowly, deliberately, he draped the veil over Alara's shoulders. The change was immediate. The harsh whispers of the nobles died on their tongues. The veil shimmered with a light that was not entirely of this world. It clung to Alara's ragged clothes, transforming them in a subtle, magical way. She still wore her rags, yet now they were framed by the majesty of the Alpha King's crown, and it was impossible to mock her. A silence fell over the ballroom. Nobles stared in shock, mouths open, hearts racing with fear and disbelief. No one had ever dared to place the crown veil upon an outsider, let alone a commoner. Yet Kalen's decision was clear. He did not falter. He did not hesitate. The choice was his, and the court could only watch. Alara's pulse raced, her hands trembling as the weight of the veil settled on her shoulders. She wanted to speak, to protest, but her voice caught in her throat. All she could do was look up into Kalen's eyes, and in that moment she felt a connection neither of them fully understood. It was as if the veil had not only covered her body, but had also bridged the distance between their souls. The nobles muttered among themselves, their words sharp with jealousy and confusion. Some called for her removal, but Kalen's presence silenced them. He sat again on his throne, his hand resting lightly on hers. The gesture was both possessive and protective, a subtle declaration that she was now under his guard, whether the court approved or not. For Alara, fear mixed with awe. She had stepped into a world she never belonged to. Yet somehow, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known before. She realized that the crown veil was not only a symbol of Kalen's choice, it was a shield against the cruelty of the world, a promise of power and protection. And yet beneath her awe, a whisper of doubt stirred. She was still the girl in rags. She was still untrained, unknown, and vulnerable. Could she truly survive the scrutiny of the court, the jealousy of the nobles, and the dangerous expectations of the Alpha King? Her heart pounded with both excitement and fear. As the music began again, Kalen gestured for her to follow him to the center of the hall. The nobles watched in tense silence as he led her to the dance floor. The room seemed to hold its breath. The Alpha King and the ragged maiden were about to dance, a union of the most powerful and the most vulnerable, a moment that would be remembered in the annals of the kingdom. Alara's steps were uncertain, but Kalen's hand was firm and steady, guiding her. Every step they took together was a defiance of the court's expectations, a challenge to the rigid order of Lurien. Whispers of awe and fear spread through the nobles. None had seen courage like this. None had seen power wielded with such quiet grace. For Alara, each step was a revelation. She was not just a ragged girl. She was seen. She was chosen. She was part of something far greater than herself, a story that would weave her destiny with that of the Alpha King and the kingdom itself. And yet the air was tense with unspoken questions. Why had Kalen chosen her? What did the crown veil truly mean? And most importantly, what danger awaited her in a world that would not forgive weakness? Cliffhanger. As the final note of the music faded, Kalen leaned close, his voice barely a whisper. The court may see rags, but I see what they cannot. His eyes burned with a storm of emotion, and Alara realized with both fear and wonder that her life had changed forever. Outside the ballroom, the first shadows of a coming darkness stirred, hinting that this choice would not be without consequence. The morning after the mating ball, the palace was unusually quiet. Sunlight filtered through towering windows, casting long patterns of gold across the marble floors. Alara awoke in a guest chamber, the crown veil still draped over her shoulders, shimmering faintly in the morning light. Though her heart still raced from the night before, she could not shake the feeling that everything had changed. Her life in the shadows, the alleys, the rags, the silence, felt as though it belonged to someone else now. Kalen did not appear immediately, though a servant slipped a note beneath the door. "Meet me in the throne room at midday. There is much to discuss." Her stomach tightened. She had expected scorn, danger, or humiliation, but instead the Alpha King had shown her protection. Even now his actions weighed heavily, a strange mixture of command and care. When she entered the throne room, Kalen was waiting. He sat tall, his black hair falling slightly into his eyes, which were unreadable as ever. The crown veil lay across a velvet cushion beside him, yet when he saw her, he gestured for her to keep it. "You will wear it," he said, his voice low, steady, and powerful. "It is more than a symbol, it is protection, and it is dangerous in the wrong hands." Alara's fingers brushed the delicate threads of the veil. "I don't understand. Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Kalen's eyes softened for the briefest moment, and he looked away. "Because you are not afraid," he said finally. "Not in the way others are. The court judges by appearances, by wealth, by status. You have something they cannot measure." Before Alara could question further, a sudden gust of wind rushed through the open windows. The curtains fluttered, and the crown veil twinkled as though alive. A shiver ran down her spine. She realized then that the veil was not ordinary. It pulsed with a strange energy, as if it could feel her emotions. Kalen rose and walked toward her. "The veil has been worn by every Alpha King for centuries," he explained. "It is said to be touched by the spirits of those who came before. It binds the wearer partially to the fate of the Alpha King. Those who cannot bear it suffer." Alara's eyes widened. "Suffer? The court does not know the true power of the veil," Kalen continued. "Nor do they know the curse that shadows the line of Alpha Kings. Every choice, every doubt, every betrayal feeds it. And now, the veil binds you to me. Part of you is already connected to the kingdom's fate." Fear surged through Alara's chest. She was a simple girl from the alleys, untrained in magic or politics. She had survived hardship, yes, but never the weight of power, the eyes of an entire kingdom upon her, or a curse that could twist her life into shadows. And yet, a strange calm settled in her heart. If Kalen, the Alpha King himself, trusted her, perhaps she could face the challenges ahead. Kalen noticed her hesitation. "You may leave," he said gently. "Return to your old life if you wish. No one can force you to stay." Alara looked around the throne room, at the towering columns and the polished marble, and then at Kalen's face, so serious, so commanding. And she realized something. She could not turn away. Not now, not after the veil had chosen her, not after fate itself had placed her in this moment. I will stay," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. Kalen's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "Good, then we begin." The following days were filled with lessons, both subtle and harsh. Kalen taught her the ways of the court, the etiquette, the gestures, the hidden meanings behind every bow, every word, every glance. He trained her in the knowledge of the kingdom's history, the old stories of kings, queens, and warriors who had fallen victim to the curse that haunted the Alpha line. The nobles were not kind. Many whispered behind closed doors, spreading rumors of the ragged girl who dared to wear the crown veil. Some plotted ways to humiliate her, hoping to drive her out before the mating rite was completed. Yet each attempt failed, as if the veil itself protected her. When a noblewoman tried to trip her during a ballroom rehearsal, Alara stumbled but did not fall, and the attacker slipped instead, her pride shattered before the court. Alara began to sense that the veil responded to her emotions. When she felt fear, it shivered. When she felt anger or defiance, it glowed faintly, warm against her skin. Kalen noticed, of course. One evening, as they studied maps in the candle-lit library, he reached out and touched her hand. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked quietly. I think so," Alara admitted. "It's like it knows me." It does, Kalen said, his voice almost reverent. The veil does not choose randomly. It chooses who is strong enough to bear its weight, who is brave enough to face what is coming. Alara's mind raced. What did he mean? What was coming? She thought of the shadows in the palace corridors, the strange coldness that seemed to seep from the walls at night. And then she remembered the whispers of the villagers, the tales of shadow wolves, of curses that could bend the soul. The court might be dazzling, the Alpha King commanding, but the world beyond this room was still full of darkness, and now she was entwined with it. One night, Kalen brought her to the palace gardens. Moonlight spilled over fountains and flower beds, illuminating paths lined with silver statues of past rulers. The air was crisp, and the scent of jasmine filled Alara's senses. You must learn to trust yourself, Kalen said, walking beside her. The court will try to manipulate you, the nobles will test you, and the curse will try to break you. Alara looked up at him, her eyes wide. Break me? Yes, he admitted. It feeds on fear, jealousy, and betrayal. It grows stronger with weakness and doubt. And once it awakens fully, it is relentless. She shivered, pulling the crown veil closer around her shoulders. And I'm connected to it, Kalen nodded. Partially. You are not yet bound fully, but the veil links our fates. Every choice you make, every emotion you feel, touches the kingdom. That is why I placed the veil on you in front of the court, to signal that you are under my protection and that you are strong enough to face the shadow. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The moonlight painted Kalen's face in shades of silver and shadow. He was beautiful, terrifying, and vulnerable all at once. Alara felt a strange warmth in her chest, a pull that was more than fear or duty. It was something deeper, something that connected them beyond words. You are different from everyone I've met, he said finally, almost to himself. The court will never understand you. I fear they will try to destroy what they cannot control. Alara's voice was barely a whisper. Then I must learn to be strong enough to survive them. Kalen studied her, his dark eyes reflecting both admiration and concern. Yes, he said, but strength alone is not enough. You must also learn to trust me, even when I appear harsh or unyielding. We are bound by more than the veil. We are bound by the fate of the kingdom itself. Their lessons continued, growing more intense each day. Kalen guided her through trials of endurance and wit, sometimes in the library, deciphering ancient texts of magic and prophecy, sometimes in the training halls, learning the subtleties of court combat and self-defense. Each moment forged a connection between them, one built on trust, respect, and the quiet thrill of discovery. Yet danger lurked in the shadows. The nobles continued their scheming. Alara overheard plans to challenge her during the mating rite, to humiliate her in front of the kingdom. Some whispered that she was unworthy, a girl of rags with no noble blood. Others muttered of curses and forbidden magic, claiming the veil had chosen poorly. Alara felt the weight of their judgment keenly. She had survived hunger and poverty, but she had never faced such scrutiny, such open hostility. Every day, the whispers clawed at her confidence. But with Kalen's guidance, she began to understand the true meaning of the crown veil. It was not merely protection, but a test, a measure of courage and resilience. One night, as a full moon rose over the castle towers, Alara stood on the balcony, the crown veil shimmering in the moonlight. Kalen joined her silently. You see it now, he said softly. The curse is not just a story. It waits always in the corners of the kingdom. And if we fail, it will consume everything. Alara nodded, feeling the weight of her responsibility settle over her shoulders. Fear still lingered, but it was tempered with determination. She was no longer the girl who wandered the alleys unnoticed. She was the girl chosen by the Alpha King, bound by a magical veil, and tied to the fate of the kingdom itself. Cliffhanger. As they gazed at the horizon, a shadow moved in the distance, a figure cloaked in darkness, watching the castle with eyes that glimmered like fire. Alara tightened her grip on the veil, sensing the first stirrings of a threat that neither she nor Kaelin could yet fully face. Something ancient and dangerous had awakened, and the safety of the kingdom, and their hearts, would soon be tested like never before. The days following Alara's first lessons in the crown veil passed like a dream caught between reality and shadow. The palace with its silver towers and glittering halls seemed almost too vast, too alive, and yet every corridor echoed with whispers. Nobles watched her with suspicion, courtiers with curiosity, and servants with quiet awe. She was no longer the ragged girl from the alleys. She was the girl chosen by the Alpha King, the girl draped in the crown veil, and every eye in the kingdom could see it. Yet Alara did not feel triumphant. The veil pulsed lightly against her skin, a constant reminder that her fate was no longer her own. With each beat of her heart she felt its subtle magic, a warmth when Kaelin's presence was near, a shiver when danger lingered unseen. The court had not yet tested her fully, and even now she sensed their plotting. The nobles' jealousy was sharp, their malice quiet but deadly, like shadows moving just beyond the light. Kaelin noticed her unease. One afternoon, in the golden light of the library, he closed the heavy tome they had been studying and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "They will challenge you," he said, his voice low and certain. "The court cannot tolerate the veil on someone they consider unworthy. You must be ready." Alara's fingers tightened around the crown veil. I do not even know what I am capable of," she admitted. "I am still just a girl in rags after all." Kaelin's eyes softened, and for a moment the harshness of the Alpha King fell away, revealing something almost human. "Strength is not measured by wealth, beauty, or skill alone," he said. "It is measured by courage. By the ability to stand when others would fall. That is what the veil sees. That is why it chose you." The days became a delicate dance of preparation. Kaelin trained her in the subtleties of the court. How to move so that every gesture commanded attention. How to speak so that even the nobles who despised her could not challenge her words. And how to wield the quiet authority that came from confidence and self-awareness. Alara also began to understand the true nature of the crown veil. It was not merely protection. It was a key, a conduit of ancient magic tied to the lineage of Alpha Kings. Through it, she could sense the emotional currents of the palace, feel the whispers of the nobles' envy, and even glimpse hints of the dangers lurking beyond the castle walls. One night, Kaelin led her to the training grounds beneath the silver towers. Moonlight spilled across the open space, illuminating statues of past rulers and fallen heroes. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and earth. "You must learn to control it," Kaelin said, gesturing to the veil draped over her shoulders. "Magic like this responds to your spirit. If your mind wavers, if your fear overwhelms you, it will betray you. The curse feeds on weakness." Alara swallowed hard. "I do not want to fail," she whispered. "You will not," Kaelin said firmly. "But fear is natural. Even the strongest feel it. What matters is what you do with it." The training was not easy. The veil pulsed, responded, even resisted her at times. A whisper of magic surged through her and she stumbled, nearly losing her balance. Kaelin's hand steadied her, guiding her with patience. In that brief contact, warmth spread through her chest, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, the Alpha King and the girl who had once been invisible. Meanwhile, the nobles grew restless. Whispers turned to plots. Lady Vera, a noblewoman of considerable influence, was among the most vocal in her disdain. She believed that Alara's presence threatened her own ambitions, and whispered to anyone who would listen that the veil had been placed on a girl unworthy of its magic. "They dare mock us," she hissed one evening in the corridors, her voice cold and sharp. "A girl in rags, draped in the Alpha King's crown veil. It is an insult to our lineage." Her words spread like wildfire, igniting tension throughout the court. The nobles plotted to humiliate Alara during the upcoming rituals, hoping to break her spirit and remove her from Kaelin's favor. Elara overheard some of these schemes as she walked through the palace gardens. Her heart pounded, but she no longer felt helpless. The veil's magic hummed against her skin, steadying her, reminding her of her strength and her bond with Kaelin. She realized, too, that her lineage was not as ordinary as she had believed. Hidden in the palace archives, she discovered old records, fragments of stories about her mother, a guardian of the crown veil who had once protected the Alpha Kings from the curse. The blood that ran in her veins was powerful, a force capable of countering the shadows that threatened the kingdom. This revelation filled her with both awe and fear. She had survived the alleys, the hunger, and the mockery of strangers, but this was something far greater. She was no longer just Elara, the outcast. She was a guardian in her own right, tied to the kingdom and to Kaelin through both magic and destiny. The night of the first true trial arrived. A ceremonial dance, a test of grace, composure, and presence, would determine her standing before the court. Every noble watched closely, their eyes sharp with judgment. Even the Alpha King remained stoic, though Elara could feel the tension in his gaze. She stepped into the ballroom, the crown veil shimmering under the chandelier's light. The nobles sneered, some whispering openly now, certain that she would falter. But when Kaelin's eyes met hers, she felt a grounding warmth, a silent promise that he would not allow her to fail. The dance began. Every step was a delicate negotiation between fear and control. The nobles attempted to distract her, whispering insults and spreading false rumors, but the veil pulsed with a protective energy, steadying her. Kaelin moved beside her, guiding her subtly, his presence a beacon against the currents of jealousy that threatened to overwhelm her. For a moment, Elara felt as though she were dancing not in a ballroom but on the edge of a storm. Every glance, every whispered word, every sneer tested her resolve. And yet she moved with a grace she had never known she possessed, the crown veil glowing faintly, almost as if the spirits of the past Alpha Kings approved of her courage. But the night's triumph was not without danger. As the music swelled, a shadow flickered at the edge of the ballroom. A figure cloaked in black, unseen by most, whispered a curse into the air. The room chilled, the lights flickered, and the air thickened with the scent of smoke and something darker, something alive. Elara shivered, sensing the movement through the veil. Kaelin's hand tightened around hers, his eyes flashing with both alarm and fury. "It has begun," he murmured. Before she could ask, the shadow moved, twisting and surging through the ballroom like a living mist. Several nobles screamed as unseen forces knocked over chairs, sending crystal glasses crashing to the floor. Panic rippled through the court. Yet Elara stood firm, the crown veil glowing brightly as if in defiance of the darkness. Kaelin stepped in front of her, summoning the ancient magic of his bloodline. The air around them pulsed with energy, a radiant force that pushed back the shadow, forcing it to retreat into the corners of the hall. The nobles, trembling and awestruck, could only watch. After the chaos subsided, silence fell. Elara's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through her veins. She had faced the first true threat of the curse and survived, but she knew this was only the beginning. In the quiet that followed, Kaelin led her to the moonlit gardens. They walked in silence, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves and distant water from the fountains. "You are stronger than you realize," Kaelin said quietly. "But the curse, it is waking. It will test you in ways we cannot yet see. Shadow and fear will come for the kingdom, and for you, you must be ready." Elara swallowed hard, feeling both fear and determination. "I will be ready," she whispered. "I will not fail, not for the kingdom, not for you." Kaelin paused, his dark eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Good, but know this, courage alone is not enough. You must learn to trust yourself, to trust the veil, and to trust me completely. Only then will we face what is coming." Elara nodded. The weight of the veil was heavier now, but it was no longer just a burden. It was a source of strength, a reminder that she was chosen not by chance but by destiny. Cliffhanger. As they returned to the castle, a distant howl echoed through the night. Alara froze, recognizing it from the old tales, the sound of shadow wolves, creatures bound to the curse, stalking the edges of the kingdom. The veil shivered on her shoulders, warning her of the coming danger. She glanced at Kaelin, whose eyes had darkened with concern. The first real battle was yet to come, and the shadows were closer than ever. The shadow wolves had returned. Their howls echoed across the kingdom, chilling the bones of even the bravest soldiers. The castle, usually a place of light and order, now trembled under the looming threat of the curse. Nobles and servants alike huddled in fear, whispering rumors of doom, while Alara stood at the balcony, the crown veil shimmering against her shoulders. Kaelin joined her silently, his presence both comforting and commanding. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, reflected concern, anger, and a flicker of something else, pride. Alara had grown since the first day he had placed the crown veil upon her. She was no longer the ragged girl from the alleys. She was a guardian, a partner to the Alpha King, and a force the curse had not anticipated. "The shadow grows stronger," Kaelin said, his voice low and steady. "Tonight we face it fully. You must trust yourself, the veil, and me." Alara nodded. Fear still lurked in her chest, but determination had replaced despair. She had survived mockery, nobles, plots, and the first stirrings of the curse. Now she would face its full fury. The throne room had been transformed into a battlefield of light and shadow. Candles flickered, casting trembling patterns across the marble floor. The nobles and guards had gathered, some in awe, some in fear. But all were ready to witness the confrontation that would decide the fate of the kingdom. Kaelin stepped to the center, the crown veil glowing faintly as he raised his hands. "The curse has lingered in Lurien for centuries," he announced, his voice ringing through the hall. "Tonight it will end." Alara followed, her hands brushing the veil. She could feel the magic flowing through her veins, awakening the strength of her lineage. Her mother's spirit, the guardian of the veil, seemed to whisper encouragement, reminding her of the courage she had inherited. The first shadow wolves appeared, moving like living darkness across the floor. Their eyes glowed red, and their forms twisted unnaturally. The nobles gasped, taking involuntary steps back. But Alara stood her ground, the veil reacting to her presence, shining brighter with every heartbeat. Kaelin moved beside her, his own magic flaring. Together they formed a shield of light, pushing the shadows back. Yet the wolves were relentless, circling, testing, probing for weakness. "You must strike at the heart," Kaelin whispered, his eyes locking onto hers. "Do not fear them, they feed on fear." Alara inhaled deeply. The whispers of her lineage filled her mind. She had survived the alleys, the mockery, and the court. Now she would survive this. Raising her hands, she let the magic of the veil flow through her, extending outward like silver threads of light. The shadows hissed, recoiling, but they did not vanish. Kaelin met her gaze. "Together," he said, and with that they advanced as one, their powers intertwining. The crown veil pulsed in response, amplifying both of their energies. The shadow wolves screamed and twisted, darkness colliding with radiant light in a spectacular clash that illuminated the throne room in flashes of silver and gold. The battle tested every ounce of courage and skill Alara had learned. Some of the shadows lunged at her, probing for hesitation, but she met each attack with focus and precision. She felt Kaelin's power beside her, a tether that anchored her even when doubt threatened to overwhelm. Their movements were synchronized, a dance of light and shadow, of strength and trust, of destiny and choice. At one point, a shadow wolf leapt toward the crown veil itself, attempting to sever the magical bond that tied her to Kaelin. Alara's heart raced, but she held firm. Channeling the strength of her lineage, she flung a wave of light toward it, forcing the creature to retreat with a shriek that echoed like breaking glass. The nobles watched, wide-eyed and speechless. What they had mocked, what they had doubted, now stood radiant and unbroken. The ragged girl in the crown veil was no longer an outcast. She was a hero, a guardian, and a beacon against the curse. As the last shadow wolf dissolved into mist, the hall fell silent. The candle flame steadied. The magic of the crown veil dimmed to a soft, steady glow, signaling the end of the confrontation. Alara's chest heaved, sweat glistening on her forehead, but her eyes shone with triumph and awe. Kalen turned to her, his face serious but softened with something almost tender. "You have done well," he said. "You have faced the darkness and emerged stronger. You are no longer just chosen, you are worthy." Alara felt a surge of relief and pride. The weight of the crown veil had been heavy, but it had also guided her, awakened her, and revealed the courage she had always possessed. She realized that strength was not only about magic or power, but about trust, resilience, and the ability to stand when fear surrounded you. In the days that followed, the court began to shift. Nobles who had plotted against her now approached cautiously, some in respect, others in silent, grudging admiration. Lady Vera, once the most vocal of her critics, could only bow stiffly, acknowledging Alara's strength. The crown veil had not only protected her, but also transformed her into a figure no one could ignore. Yet the kingdom still carried the weight of the curse's shadow. Kalen and Alara knew that while the immediate threat had passed, vigilance was necessary. The bond between them, strengthened by battle and trust, had become more than political. It was personal, profound, and unbreakable. Kalen invited Alara to walk the palace gardens under the full moon. The fountains glimmered, silver light spilling across the pathways, and the scent of jasmine mingled with the night air. They moved side by side, comfortable in a silence that spoke more than words ever could. "You were magnificent," Kalen said quietly, stopping to look at her. "The court may have doubted you, the shadows may have tested you, but you never faltered." Alara lowered her gaze, feeling both bashful and proud. "I had guidance," she said softly. "Without you, she trailed off, unsure of how to express the depth of her gratitude and trust. Kalen reached out, lifting the crown veil gently. "No," he said, his voice firm yet kind. "This was always yours. I only helped you see it." His hand lingered near hers, and in that moment the distance between Alpha King and Maiden vanished. They were equals, partners, connected by fate and by courage. Alara's heart fluttered. She had once been invisible, mocked, and alone. Now she stood beside the most powerful man in the kingdom, her strength recognized, her courage tested, her destiny fulfilled. And yet, she knew that this was only the beginning of their journey together. The final ceremony was held in the grand ballroom, bathed in sunlight that poured through the towering windows. Nobles gathered, soldiers stood in orderly ranks, and the court waited, breathless with anticipation. Alara, draped in the crown veil, walked beside Kalen. Her steps were confident, measured, each one a declaration that she belonged here, that she was no longer the ragged girl of the alleys. Kalen raised his hand and the court fell silent. "Today," he announced, "we celebrate not only the bond of the Alpha King and his chosen, but the courage and strength that stand against darkness." Alara met his gaze, feeling the weight of the words and the sincerity behind them. This was her moment, not a girl chosen by chance but a heroine recognized, a guardian honored, a partner in both love and destiny. The crown veil shimmered one last time as Kalen draped it more fully around her shoulders, a symbol of unity, strength, and the bond they now shared. The court, awestruck and humbled, bowed in respect, recognizing not only the power of the Alpha King but the courage of the maiden who had once been invisible. Kalen took Alara's hand, holding it firmly yet gently. "The kingdom may still hold shadows," he whispered. "But together we are stronger than any darkness." Alara nodded, a soft smile gracing her lips. "Together," she echoed, her heart full of both love and resolve. Epilogue. The sun set over Lurien, painting the silver towers in hues of gold and crimson. Ilara and Kaelin stood on the balcony, overlooking the city that had once mocked and doubted her. She had survived the alleys, the court, and the shadows. She had embraced her lineage, faced the curse, and emerged stronger. The crown veil, a symbol of power, protection, and destiny, rested on her shoulders. But it was no longer a weight. It was a reminder of courage, love, and the bond that had been forged through trials and trust. As they watched the first stars appear in the twilight sky, a soft breeze stirred the veil. Ilara turned to Kaelin, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers, and realized that the journey was far from over. But for the first time, she was ready. Together they could face anything, shadows, curses, or the doubts of the world. And in the distance, beyond the city walls, the faintest flicker of darkness stirred once more. But it no longer frightened her. With Kaelin by her side, she was no longer the forgotten maiden. She was the chosen, the guardian, the light that could tame the shadows. And so, beneath the silver towers and the first glimmering stars, the Alpha King and the girl in the crown veil began their new chapter, a chapter of love, courage, and a kingdom reborn.